In December of 2018, I got my first review request from an author. At the time, I didn't even know that was like something you could do, just get review copies from authors. But after posting that first review in January of 2019, I have never looked back. And over the years, I have realized that there's kind of a dearth of information when it comes to the relationship between indie authors and reviewers, mostly because we're essentially trying to create a whole new thing. Traditional publishing doesn't really allow for a lot of connection between authors and reviewers, and so in a lot of cases you can end up with maybe some awkward moments because you're just not sure what the etiquette is. And over the years, I have created a couple different pieces of media, I will have those linked down below, that talk about, hey, here's how to ask politely for a review. Here's what not to do when you're interacting with reviewers. But of course, I don't know everything indie authors need or want to know. So finally, I said, hey, just ask me your questions. What have you as an author always wanted to ask a potential reviewer? And let's go through them. Now, obligatory disclaimer, I am only a single reviewer. I have discussed things with other reviewers, but I can hardly claim to speak for everyone. I'm just the one that likes giving tips. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. Another reviewer might have different opinions, and if you are a reviewer with different opinions, please feel free to post them respectfully in the comments below. But with nothing else, let's get started. First question by Morgan Burbank. Do you want to build a snowman? Yes. I'm so over summer. All of this super humidity is leaving my skin hypersensitive, and I constantly feel like I got bugs crawling all over me. Please bring autumn and winter. I don't care. I have my cozy corner already. I am so ready. Bring me the cozy months. Okay, but on to like their actual question. How can indie authors better find indie book reviewers, considering most review on their own blogs and aren't centralized? The thing with this is that there actually is a kind of central-ish hub. Most book bloggers and booktubers will still cross-post their reviews to Goodreads or Storygraph. It's not usually where they consider like their home of reviewing, but it is the place that they will put one version of it. In some cases, they'll just wholly copy and paste the entire blog post. I find that annoying. Okay, you don't need to give me the synopsis again. The synopsis is already on the Goodreads page. But while I would caution you against messaging directly through Goodreads, because Goodreads actually has guidelines against that and your message could get reported, that'd be a good way to at least find the names of people that are reading books similar to yours. So looking up other indie books that are in the same genre or same general vibe and seeing who's reviewing them. You could also ask fellow indie authors like, hey, have you had any luck? Who have you gotten to review? I know that when I get a review request that name drops, oh, hey, so-and-so that you reviewed and liked their book told me to send this review request. That does make it stand out from the pile, just because if I liked that book and you're writing a similar vibe, like there's a good chance that I'm gonna like that one too. Just in general though, you gotta get more into the online reader communities. I know there's the whole discourse about, authors and reader spaces, but honestly, that's a very specific critique for a very specific situation where the author is essentially messing with readers when it comes to the reviews of their book specifically. No one is saying that authors and readers need to be completely siloed from each other, because your average author is also a reader. If you liked books enough to write one, you usually read a couple of them. But in general, I would also suggest, if there are any reviewers watching this, to make it more obvious that you're reviewing indie, because that first author found me because I had posted a series on my channel that was titled Best and Worst of Indie Books. Even today, I literally put indie review in the title of any review I post on the blog or on this channel, and I'll also use indie books hashtags. So if you are a reviewer, I would definitely say hey, make it a little bit more obvious so that the SEO terms work just that little bit more. But in general, yeah, it's going to take a little bit of searching. It's going to take maybe a site like Booksprout, which is an ARC site specifically for indie books. Now, I don't know how much luck you're going to have getting reviewers on there. I don't know what the would it be ROI for review copies? I don't know. I don't know how much of a review book actually gets picked up on that site, but I know they exist. So I would try a site like that as well. Of course, if you can ever get your book nominated for awards, that is kind of like a reviewing type deal. But in general, it's just going to take a lot of little searching, not just for blanket any indie reviewers. Okay, you don't want to waste your time sending a message to someone who would never want it, but looking, okay, who's already been active around this specific type of indie book that would also want mine. Author C.A. House asks, do you find that different genre authors perform in different ways for interviews? I'm gonna be real with y'all. I don't do interviews. They are really labor intensive. You know, you have to like schedule with another person and come up with all the questions on top of just having already read the book, compared to a lot of the views you're gonna get, because readers don't generally watch a lot of author interviews unless it's an author they already love. So if you're interviewing a brand new author, it can get tricky to try to get a lot of viewers for that interview. However, I will say I have noticed genre differences in performance of content as a whole. There are specific genres that tend to jump out more in indie books, specifically high fantasy and smut, kind of similar to, you know, the romantasy craze, but I think it predates it because Spiffbo, the self-published fantasy blog off, has been going on for, it might be an actual decade now. And high fantasy as a whole has just always done just a little bit better than other genres when it comes to indie discussions. But you also do have like reviewers whose entire deal is smutty romance. That's their entire deal. In fact, I have been linked on a blog that's all about smutty romance because I wrote an article about MLM romances and got linked there. And I still see, like, in my blog stats, I still see people coming from that site. So it actually does pretty well. That doesn't mean that if you work in other genres that your work is going to be overlooked, but definitely if you see an indie author whose marketing work is doing gangbusters and it is in smutty romance or high fantasy or smutty romantasy, take it with a grain of salt. If you're writing in a different genre, you're probably not going to get as much attention because that content just doesn't do quite as well. There is some element of indie reviewing for horror, but that tends to be a little bit more of a closed ecosystem. It's not quite as gigantic. So in general, don't just assume that because this other indie author has gangbusters content that you're going to be able to match them, or that it's even reasonable to match them, because a large part of their success might be the genre. Jen Donahue asks, when you're reviewing a book in the series, do you ever return to earlier books / your earlier reviews for a refresher? Why you gotta call me out, Jennifer? I should. I really should, because in some cases, I'm going literal years between installments, but I don't. I know I don't have the time to reread, like, at all. I've got so many books I want to get to, so many challenges to do, so much content to get out, that going back and rereading the previous book in a series just to refresh my memory for a review that, again, doesn't perform as well as other content doesn't make a lot of sense. But I probably should start rereading at least reviews, like the written ones, because when I did my giant mega review where I reviewed every book that I had gotten in the interim between, like, when I left BookTube and came back, I actually realized that the writing did jog my memory in certain ways, not in every way, but I might have to start doing that, where before I start the reading of the next installment to go back and read the previous review, but rereading the previous installment with the rate at which I'm putting out content just doesn't make sense. But yeah, I should definitely start doing that. Dax, the Sapphic fantasy author, gives us 2 questions. The first one being, I've seen some reviewers say in their guidelines, don't send the ebook files unless / until I ask. And some say, please send the files with your request to minimize back and forth. If I find a reviewer whose guidelines don't specify either way, what should we default to? I'm not going to lie, it feels a little bit main character syndrome to be like, we should default to my personal preference, which is don't send the copy. But I do have a method to my madness, because sending the file ahead of time when you're not sure that they want it can come across super presumptuous, like you've just already assumed they're going to say yes. And also, there is a minority of indie authors that has given the whole community a stereotype of sending leaks, sending files without being asked, unsolicited, and you don't even want to accidentally appear to be that way because that could get you blocked. But this is also a great opportunity to show the reviewer that you're reading their guidelines. Because I'm going to tell you right now, that's not as common as it should be. I have had to remove any mention of my email from anywhere not inside my review policy because so many indie authors would not read it. I'm so serious. I used to have it I used to say oh, read through this and then send the email here. Everyone would skip it. And you can tell. Okay. And yes, we feel the disrespect when you're asking me to read hundreds of pages of your writing, but you can't even read a few of mine. Okay, regardless, this would be the perfect opportunity to be like, hey, I was reading through your guidelines and they didn't specify whether or not you wanted a copy attached to the email. So out of respect, I have refrained from attaching it until you give me the go ahead. That not only says, hey, I read through your guidelines, but also I respect your right to say yes or no to this and can help the reviewer feel more at ease in the entire interaction because most reviewers are on edge. We don't want to be the center of the next discourse of an author going after a reviewer, but also it might be a way to point out to the reviewer hey, this could be something to add into your review policy, maybe something they didn't think about, because when you're creating a review policy, there's a lot you don't think about. Mine was grown over many years of, oh, I should add this. Oh, I should add this. Oh, this thing happened. Now I need to add this part. And again, this is something brand new, relatively speaking, in the publishing world where your average influencer, content creator can just become a reviewer and need a policy, but there's not really a template for it. So maybe pointing that out in the message would help them realize they need to add that in. Dax's second question reads, if an indie author emails a reviewer for a request for review and doesn't hear back at all, and literal years pass without even a sorry not interested, is it okay to email about a new book that comes out later that the indie author thinks the reviewer would like? And I would say, yes. I think it can be a little bit of a culture shock to a lot of reviewers, especially when you begin, just how much you'll have to say no, because a lot of reviewers don't understand the gigantic amount of indie authors looking for review and how much they'll send you one as a Hail Mary. Maybe you'll like this, even if it doesn't seem up your alley. And I know when I was first starting out, I never wanted to say no, but I always wanted to give a response. So I ended up accepting so many books that I disliked or that I had to awkwardly send a hey, I'm DNFing email later, and I hated it. So it could just be that your reviewer is not good at rejections. I would encourage all reviewers to get slightly better at that. It's never going to be fun, but at least a kind of template of what to follow in your email to say kindly, because of X, Y, and Z, I'm not interested at this time, but I hope you find readers that like your work. Thank you for the request. Something to that extent. I have also had it happen where after I had already been reviewing for a considerable amount of time, I realized certain review requests were actually falling into my spam, and I didn't know it. In one particular instance, I had meant to reply back to an author to say yes, and then the very next day, a giant life event happened, and I forgot for a year. So that's not to say that the reviewer shouldn't get back to you in a certain time frame. I will usually still leave a review request in my inbox for a little bit, just because in a lot of cases, I'm not in a decision-making mindset when I first get the email, and I don't want to default to no just because I was tired and stressed when I got the email. So I will usually wait until at least to have a couple to look through and then make all those decisions at once. So more than likely, it's just one, it got lost in the email. Two, they are stressed out by rejecting people, and doesn't usually mean anything particularly negative about your work. So yes, I would always go again, and maybe don't specify that you sent the previous request, because that could come across really passive aggressive and is not going to help you get a yes. Zofia Warwick asks, would you prefer someone with an established genre or quality write something under another pseudonym the way Theodore Geisel did with Theo Lessig, or Nora Roberts with her pseudonym that escapes me. I believe that is J.D. Robb. Preferred? No. I would not prefer differences just for genre, if only because even if you are writing across different genres, there's still a vibe to your work. Like, I know that Sebastian Nothwell is always going to have a twink character get injured and then nursed back to health by a guy that's obsessed with him across genres. I always know that Shami Stovall is going to have a gigantic explosive ending that may or may not have giant monsters fighting, regardless of the genre. You're still going to have some level of connectivity throughout just because it's you writing it, and there's going to be certain attributes or characteristics or traits that your writing has regardless of what the greater genre is. The only time I would ever say unequivocally yes, do a pseudonym is if you are writing both like adult graphic smut and YA. In that case, yes, split it, because YA can be read by kids as young as 11 or 12, and we don't need them stumbling across graphic sex scenes just because they were relying on the author name. I believe there's the author Cameron James / Dylan James that does this, where when he is writing for YA, it is Dylan James. When he is writing for, adult erotica, it is Cameron, which I believe is his... Well, I think they're both his legal names. I think it's like a first name, middle name instance. But in that case, yes, separate it out so that we're not having minors accidentally stumbling across very graphic content that they might not be ready for yet just because they were relying on an author name. But beyond that, I don't necessarily think so. I think that there are still shared traits among your work, even if you're not necessarily aware of it. And honestly, it's one of my favorite things to be the person that becomes aware of it when I read a lot of authors' work across different genres. But it's already so hard to get your name solidified as an author that trying to build up several pseudonyms at once could be very difficult. In a lot of cases, Nora Roberts could afford to also be J.D. Robb and maybe have J.D. Robb be not as popular because she's fucking Nora Roberts and she's the queen on the mountain. She can do that. But if you're an indie author with maybe not as much reach, don't split your reach further unless it is to help kids stay with kid appropriate content. London Price asks, what kinds of things do you like to see from authors? Like, what's the best bonus? And I'm not exactly sure if this is referring to physical items like swag accompanying the book or just aspects of a book that I am particularly looking for. As far as swag goes, I'm actually not accepting physical books right now. Haven't for a while just because my shelves have gotten really overloaded. And even now that I have freed up more room, I kind of already have that room bookmarked with other books in mind because I'm working through some gigantic series. But when I did get swag, I only really accepted it after the fact, after I'd already accepted the book, reviewed it, and liked it. And I've gotten some great stuff. I've gotten, everything from lens cloths and, your usual bookmarks and stickers to loose leaf tea and candles and art prints, and it's great. It's awesome. I would hate to get it beforehand. I would hate to get all of this stuff before I even knew whether or not I liked the book, because then I would feel so much more pressure to like it, and I would feel so much worse if I didn't, because I have rated books as low as 2 stars before, but if I had gotten a whole bunch of stuff, that 2-star would feel even worse. And I don't want to feel pressure to rate a certain way just because I got stuff. But if we're talking more of the general, what am I looking for in a book or in a review request? If it's gay, queer, any kind of mention of queerness in the synopsis usually has me pricking up a little bit. I especially love it when it's MLM written by queer men specifically. Yes, that includes trans men, but queer men specifically. They're very underrepresented in their own story. I also love it when one of the formats offered is an audiobook. That's pretty rare and a pretty easy way to stand out from the crowd if you're offering an audiobook copy. I will usually also ask for a text copy on top of the audiobook just for note-taking and double checking spelling and stuff purposes. But for the most part, there are different tropes and things that I'm looking for in your average review request. But for the most part, I'm really just looking to make sure that 1, your review request is respectful, and 2, that it has a general vibe that my brain says, ooh, And sometimes I could not tell you why Brain did not say ooh. Brain went, and I don't know why. And it's really hard to have to explain that in a rejection. Like, I can't tell you the reason why I don't want this right now, but Brain says no. So in general, I would focus more on making sure that you get your book to reviewers who would like your book for itself, rather than trying to like sweeten the pot with anything extra, because reviewers know what you're doing. And in a lot of cases, they will feel like they're being bought if you're trying to add all of this extra stuff on before they've even read it. So for the most part, definitely if you think your book has a specific trope or concept that the reader would like, include that in your message, but you gotta fall back on the quality of your pitch as a whole to rely on getting that yes. The last question I wanted to answer in this video isn't one that I was asked in this latest batch of questions, but one that I have been asked repeatedly, and I don't think I've ever talked about it in a lot of depth on my channel before, and that is, do I take it easy on indie books? Do I make allowances because they're easy books? And the answer is a hard and fast no, never. I actually find that concept incredibly insulting, which might be seen as strange considering the fact that I have a lot of indie authors ask me that specifically. But part of the issue is that I've just had so many fantastic experiences with indie books that I've just naturally gotten higher standards. I have had so many moments where I would be messaging the author like, I just got to that one scene, you know the one, and how fucking dare you, I didn't deserve that, good job. And like just being so in my feels because of the fantastic writing and the plot points and the characters. And I've also had other moments where I'm messaging indie authors like, I got to that one scene, you know the one, you did that just for me, didn't you? Twirling my hair, kicking my feet. Like, I've had way too many positive feelings, interactions, experiences as a result of indie books, that this idea that they are so lesser, so incapable of keeping up with trad books that you need to just lower all of your standards for them is silly and insulting. They're not incapable. They're not unable to hack it. They are not giving you a lesser experience. Like, they're still professionals charging money for a product, and they deserve to be treated like adult professionals who are charging money for a product. Yeah, it's usually cheaper, but that's because they also don't have a publisher to pay, and also they have to compete with a giant machine that can put out all of this marketing money. But no, I find it the most insulting thing in the world to be like, well, they're just an indie author, so you have to lower their standards because they're just not gonna be as good. No, they are. They're going to be as good. They're going to be just as soul-destroying. Fucking end of book 3, Shammy. I'm still on you for that. But no, they deserve the exact same level of critique, of discernment, of study as any other book does. They are not lesser. They are not incapable. And while, yes, you are going to have to put more work into discerning what book would be up your alley with things like reading excerpts and looking at possible awards and such, they're still just as good as a whole. You are still hitting the same heights that you would hit with trad books, and I will not insult them by implying that they are lesser by giving them lesser standards. So that is it, at least for today. If you're an indie author that has any more questions I didn't answer here, please let me know down in the comments. If you're a reviewer or someone that wants to be a reviewer, please let me know. I would love to do a how to become an indie reviewer at some point. If not here, then on the blog, which of course linked down below. But in general, I just hope that indie authors have an easier time getting those reviewers, and that reviewers get more good books. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.